Hello, namaste. Welcome to our next session, and this is one of the most important part of programming, which is called functions. Functions, if functions would have not existed from the beginning, as I've been saying, whenever you want to learn any technical concept, you have to ask yourself why this particular thing exists, why it was done, and what happens if it does not exist. If you understand this, and when you ask that why question, don't ask that why question just at the surface level. So you keep asking why question in a recursive mode till you get to the bottom of it. And this technique is called first principle thinking. If you apply first principle thinking when you learn technical things, you develop immense clarity in why certain things are designed in a certain way and why they exist and how you can use those in achieving your objectives or delivering your projects. So functions, if they do not exist, what would have happened? Then every software would have been a long software with lakhs and lakhs of lines of code, and they are written sequentially. Let's say you start main from here and then you keep writing code this way. Let's say you want to print something on the screen, right? And to print something on the screen, definitely, I'm sure the code, internal code that talks to the device drivers and everything, probably, let's say it's 100 lines of code. Okay. Now, if the concept of functions did not exist, what would happen? You would end up writing that 100 lines of code every time you want to print something. So very early on, the software engineers or scientists, as they design programming languages, they realize the need for having functions. And functions helps you to move these repetitive snippets of code into a specialized block, and then whenever you need that specialized block of code to execute, you can invoke that from the code. The other thing it helps you is you can implement these functions and share it within the team. Like, say somebody is taking care of memory, somebody is taking care of networking, somebody is taking care of other functionalities. The other engineers in your team, they don't have to know about it. They just have to know what are the functions that I can use to do my project or make my code work. So it helps in decentralized development of software. When, say, 5 developers are working together, that initial first week they all have to sit together and say, okay, you will implement these functions, I'll implement these functions, and you will implement these functions. This will be input to your function, and that will be return type or an output from your function. They talk like this, then they go and sit and work and deliver those functions. It helps companies and engineers work independently in a decentralized way. The next thing it helps is quality and testing. Since you write it separately, that individual units of functions can be tested separately, and that testing is called unit testing, or generally it is called unit testing, where you test these functions separately. And generally that unit testing, again, they write a software or a code to do that unit testing. The next important thing, let's say there is a bug or an issue. Once you fix that function, automatically the rest of the software, that bug is gone. If you had this repeated code here, and let's say there is a bug here or an issue in that code, then everywhere you have to search and go and fix that in those files. That would have been the other problem. And the next problem is, if there are thousands of engineers working, then working like without functions would have been a nightmare. How will you have these files where thousands of engineers work together on that single file? Practically impossible. So functions help in multiple ways in decentralizing it, code reuse. I'll write down the points to summarize it for you. So the first thing it helps is reuse. Second thing it helps is decentralized. Then it allows the large number of engineers to work together. large number, not necessarily large number, even just say even 5 people cannot work together if there is a single file. Large number of engineers to work together. Then fourth thing it helps is quality. What do you mean by quality? The testing, verification, bug fixing, all of that. Okay. Now internally, how does functions get executed, right? So I have been telling you that whenever you run any software or any program, let's say this is your RAM, random access memory, and your programs get loaded like this in the RAM. Okay. Let's say this is a.exe, b.exe. Now as this code get loaded, so it get loaded into different segments. So this is your code segment, this is your data segment, this is your heap, this is your stack, segment, and then heap. So when you run a program, the binary file get loaded onto RAM. It get loaded onto RAM at particular address. Since the code segment and data segment are already in a binary format in that file, it just get loaded in the RAM and required memory allocation happens for that. Then you will have generally main function in many of the programming languages. So what happens is, usually when you run a program on say any of the machines like say Linux, Windows or Mac, you bundle it as a command line tool. Let's say there is no UI to that application, then you bundle it as a command line tool. Now there is a way where the execution starts before even that command line. It has some other functions, but from the code that you have written as a developer or a programmer, the very first line that get executed or the beginning of execution is the main method. So that main method here would be something like this. It will be loaded here in the stack segment like this. Okay, and this main method here will have some address. That function will have some address. Okay, so what happens is your CPU starts the execution of this code. Before main also there are some functions that was part of the packaging or bundling. Okay, so they will execute that, and finally the CPU starts executing from main. Okay, now let's say you have implemented another function called fun. There is another function called fun. Now that fun code is here, and this is at address, it is at address let's say 200. Okay, so I will zoom this part below so that you can understand it clearly. I'm only drawing the code segment. So you had your main function here, and then you have your fun function here. Let's call it fun 1, and then there is another function called fun 2. Okay, now this main function, let's say this starts at address 100, this starts at address 200, and this starts at address 300. So what happens is, as your CPU is executing this code, it has a register which is called program counter, which always remembers where it is and what address it is executing. So as it is executing line by line here, which is in, of course, not in high level language, it is in binary language, suddenly it will see a call to this function 1. When it sees this, internally in the process memory there is a table. The table is having an address. The table will be something like this. Okay, so basically it has a function name and address of it. So every function here is mapped to an address. So here it will say that you jump to the address 200. So your CPU reads an instruction here saying jump to 200. So instead of going sequentially, this program counter, it will start executing from address 200. It starts from here. Then let's say in function 1, here you invoked function 2. Function 2. So what happens? The program counter again see that there is a jump instruction here to, there is a jump instruction to go to 300. So this program counter goes to 300 address and start executing from here. And while it is doing all this, in the process stack memory here, the process stack memory here, it is remembering where it came from. So the way it is remembering is, I will write it here in the stack memory. This is stack memory, stack segment. So initially it said, okay, I am at main. Sorry, it will go from bottom to top. So it is remembering, okay, I was at main and I was at address 90. I was at address 90. Then I went to function 1, fun 1, and then I went to fun 2. Then when fun 1, when it left fun 1, let's say address was around, fun 1 is starting at 200, right? So address was at 210. Then it went to fun 2, and fun 2, it finished execution. When it is coming back, it has to come back to the line from where it left. It cannot again go from the beginning of function 1. So what it does, from here, once it finishes this, it will again jump back. It will again jump back to where it left. And how it knows it has to jump back there? Because in stack memory, it is remembering all of this. Then again from here, it will jump back to where it left here from the main. Not only it does not remember where to go back, it also remembers before leaving what was the state of the variables. Let's say before leaving here, there was one variable called n and the value was 10. Okay. You went into this function and you changed value n is equal to 20. Then you change that value n is equal to 30. It also remembers the state of n in the stack memory. All the local variables and their values get remembered in stack memory. This is the reason if you are passing that value in the function and changing that value in the function, when you go back, the value get restored back to the original value. And lot of students make mistake in the interview where they pass the value in function, they go and modify it, and when they come back, the value get restored back to the original value and their code does not work. Because they do not understand the difference, they do not understand that all the local variables, their values get stored in stack memory, and function when it comes back, it will revert the values to the original value. And when they make this mistake, the interviewers gets into this discussion. Because we clearly know that probably the person don't understand this part. Lot of programming mistakes are done in this. And there is a concept of pass by value and pass by reference. In C programming, there is a concept of pointers where they use pointers and something called pass by reference to handle this. And in case of Python and Java, we use objects, and objects are of reference type. So there you can modify the value and retain the value because the objects get allocated not in stack memory, they get allocated in heap memory. And in reference types, you do not pass the value, you pass the address of the variable. So this is a super important concept of how the function calls happen, how it remember the state, and how this program counter in the CPU jump from one part of the code to the other part and then again come back. Now you can ask this question, what if I write like function like 10,000 functions and call like 1 calling 2, 2 calling 3, 3 calling 4. What if I do like this infinitely? What will happen? As you know that these segments, the code segment is fixed, the data segment is fixed, and stack segment is fixed. The only thing that can grow infinitely or to a large extent in 64-bit machines is heap segment, right? But stack segment also has some upper bound. So at that time, you will get an error, which is very famous error called stack overflow. In fact, there is a website used by many software engineers called Stack Overflow, where they have a lot of Q&As, like questions and answers and doubt clearing. You can go and search your questions or go and search your errors. So a famous website is named after this. The concept is named after this particular phenomena, which is Stack Overflow. So Stack Overflow happens when that function is calling itself recursively, or you have called so many times in that chain of hierarchy, you have called it so many times that the stack memory is completely full. There is no more memory left to call another function. At that time you hit this error, which is called Stack Overflow. Okay, so this tells you how the reasons why functions exist and how CPU runs the functions and how it get back to its original state. Now there is another concept of passing by value and passing by reference, which is super important. I gave you a little highlight earlier, but let's understand what it is. Let's say this is a function block. Now this function block need not have any input values, or it can have input values. So it can take some input. Let's say it is taking one input called number 1 and number 2. So these two inputs, these are called input arguments or input parameters. These are called input parameters. Now the way I have passed it, I have just passed the variable names, right? So when I pass a variable name like this, these are called pass by value. So I am not passing the original variables which are allocated in the RAM or in the memory. I am not passing their address. I am only saying that I have these two variables and their values were 10 and 20. I am just giving it to you. You do something with this. Okay. So this is called pass by value. Now inside this function block, you can do anything. You are let's say you are doing sum. So you will say sum of num1 plus num2, right? Now this variable sum is a local variable to this function. So since it is a local variable to this function, the memory allocation for this happens in which segment? It happens in stack segment. It happens in stack memory, not in the heap memory, not in the data segment, definitely not in the code segment. So this local variables get allocated in stack. Now there is one exception. If you use DMA stands for what? Dynamic memory allocation. In languages like C, C++, we'll use malloc and calloc. In object-oriented programming languages, you create an object. So in such cases, it gets allocated in heap. Okay. Now what happens after this? Now how do you get the value returned back? So the value is returned back to something called return values. Return values. So the return value here in this case is sum. Please do not get confused. We are not returning address of sum. We are not sending back the address of sum. We are sending the value, return value. So only the value get passed on from this function. So as your program counter goes to that location and jump back to original location, you have to catch that value. It is almost like there are two players, right? So there is a main method, and this main method has thrown two values to this 10 and 20. It just gave the values, and this one did the addition and throwed it back as 30. Like a ball. Think it like a ball. Now this first place, from the location where you invoke that function, you need something to catch this value. So you have to catch this value. So it means you will have to say, okay, the answer is equal to function 10, 20. Because when this function return back from the stack, when it get back to the original location, that value need to be captured. What happens if you don't capture? Nothing. It is like a catch drop. it is likely you drop the ball. So nothing would happen if you don't catch it. But if you want that value back, you catch it back. So this is the technology or methodology which is pass by value. Now there is a different technique which is called pass by reference. So pass by reference, in case of C languages like C, it is pointer or addresses. But in case of managed languages like Python or Java, there are no pointers. Okay. So in case of this, basically you pass that object. You pass that object 1 and object 2. Now object could be what? It could be, student object, student 1, student 2, or any such object. Now people who don't know anything about object oriented programming will get confused, so I will not go deep into this. When I explain object oriented programming, I'll demo this one. But an equivalent of reference type in languages like Python and Java is by creating objects, passing these objects, and then returning back the updated objects. If you want to create a new object and return, you can do that. Or if you update the value inside this, it will reflect even in the place where that object is created. Because objects are, when you pass objects, it does not make copies of it. Like it does in value, pass by value. In case of objects, the original reference is passed so that you can update the addresses here. So this is super important, and this is where a lot of students and even the freshers, many of them make mistakes and their code doesn't work and it will be buggy. So now with this, now let's get to understanding the syntax of the function. So like every language, programming language grammar is called syntax. So what is the syntax? The syntax is, first you write return type, then there has to be a space, then you write function name, and then you have parameters, the function input parameters. Okay. Generally this has been the syntax so far, but Python made it very simple. So Python said, you don't have to do return type. So in case of Python, you don't need return type. You can just write function name, and then the parameters are optional anyway, right? So these parameters, these are optional. Optional means you can have them or you don't have them. So a simple syntax would be something like this and ending with these colons. Now there are three concepts: function declaration, function definition, and function invocation. So please note down all these three concepts. So please remember also these names. So what is it called? Function declaration, then definition, then invocation. So declaration is, you are only just saying what is the name of the function, what is the return type, what it takes as an input. In many of the languages like say C and all, you need to declare that function before you implement it. Or declaration also helps to know at the beginning only, okay, what are the functions that are being implemented in this file. Okay, so that is declaration. Definition means you can also call it as implementation. That implementation of that code, where you write the code, right? Where you write that code, that is definition. Okay, and invocation is where you are calling that function. You are calling the function. Now, as I said, this is the return type. In the latest version of Python, they made one change, and the change is that this return type is written here at the end. not at the beginning. And again it is optional. Even if you don't do it, it is fine. Now I will tell you one very fundamental difference between C and Python. See, what happens is, in case of C, you write say void, right? And you implement a function. But say here you return some value sum. You will get a compiler error. So this won't work in C. You get a compiler error. And in Python, you don't have to write void. You just say fun. And then here you can simply return whatever you want. Then what will happen? Automatically it will know that this function is returning a value. So in case of languages like C, Java and other language, you have to explicitly mention the return type, and it is very strict. Very strict in the sense, say if you say return type is int, you have to only return int. You cannot return float, char or any other data type. In Python, you don't have to explicitly mention return, and you can directly return what you want. Now what does this return mean? Okay, again let's go back to this diagram of jumping from one place to other. Okay, here a function can jump back to the caller early. It does not have to wait till the end based on the input value. So what I mean here is, okay, let me freshly draw it to show it with more clarity. So let's say this is your code in the RAM, in the code segment. Here you have, this is your main, and I'll just only write one function, which is function 1. It is not necessary that the code will run all the line here at the end and then jump back to where it was called. Let's say it was called here. It is not necessary it will go to entire line. You can short circuit. Let's say there is some input for which it's a wrong input. It's an invalid input. Let's say you have an input where a string is passed and you have to count the number of characters. And you found that very early that string does not have any characters. It is empty or it is null. So then you don't have to do anything, right? So in that case, instead of going all the way till end, you will only do the check at the beginning, and from here you will again go back to this. So the return statement that you write inside the function can be at multiple places. So based on your input, you can decide whether to return back directly from here, or return back from here, or return back here from the end. If you don't explicitly return, what happens? Will the CPU get stuck here infinitely? Let's say you have not put return. What happens then? If you don't write return explicitly, then once all the lines are finished, automatically the program counter goes back to where it came from. So it goes to stack memory and say, okay boss, I have finished every work in that function. There is no return. Please tell me where I came from. So it will say, okay, you came from this line number 100. So it will go back to line number 100. Declaring function, deciding what input arguments will come and when you will return and what you will return. If you have immense clarity on all of this, then you can become a good engineer and write good software or good functions. So this is up to return. Now what are the keywords here? The keyword is, in case of function, there is the function name does not have any keyword. For data types, you use whatever the data types keywords that we have. The only keyword that you use is called return, R-U-R-E-T-U-R-N, return. Okay. And in the return, it can be empty return without returning any value, or you can be returning a certain value based on what you declared. Fortunately, the return keyword is same in every language that I have come across. I have not come across any language where they try to change return as a keyword. Okay. So once you understand all these concepts of declaration, now let's go ahead and look at our nodes and declare some functions with various input parameters and output parameters and return types. Then also see that infinite loop or stack overflow demo and see if we can on our computers we can demonstrate that stack overflow scenario. And then we can also see infinite loops. And then as you write these functions, I will also show how the variables declared in the parent function will not be visible in the child function. Okay, and we'll also clearly see what is the difference between definition, invocation, declaration, all those aspects of it. One of the interesting thing with Python is, in case of other languages like say C, Java and other languages, you have a function which we call as main. And I think we all have learnt, if you are already a student of engineering or BC or MCA, you all know that we all start with this main function. So the very first line, in case of C, they write something like this, hash include stdio standard input output libraries .h header files. But after this, the very first thing we all write is something called void main, void main, like this. And in languages like Java and other languages, you also write something called string args arguments, like this. So most of the people who have learned programming other than language like Python would have started writing the very first line. Their very first line would have been a function only. And many tutorials, books everywhere, the very first line of code that people are made to learn and write is hello world. And what is hello world? So in some languages you say print, in some languages you say print out, printf. So your hello world that many languages when you are learning you write is nothing but you are invoking a function. So the main that you write like this, is what? Here this is called definition. So you are defining the main method, definition. And the print method that you called is called invocation. You are invoking the method. Invoking means you are calling that function and saying, okay, do my work. What is your work? On the console output on your laptop screen or computer screen, you want hello world to be printed. Someone else has written that function for you already. It is part of the library. It is part of your compiler or interpreter. When you install it, those libraries get copied to your computer. And you can directly invoke that function and give it some work to do. Right? So invocation, generally your first code will be like this. You write main and then you do print hello world. Right? So most of the programmers or majority of the programmers in the world, they start doing programming by defining a function and invoking a function. Okay. Now coming to Python, there is some surprise. And it's a very pleasant surprise. In Python, there is no main method. There is no main function. Because Python was designed as a scripting language. So what is a scripting language? So script is something that you want to run. It's a small piece of software you want to run on your computer, but you don't want to compile it again and again. And it will just have a sequence of instructions. So in computer, there are scripting languages like batch script, then shell script, and then Python. So there are different scripting languages where you just write instruction and you don't have main method and other standard whatever you see with languages. So Python is somewhere in between. It acts like scripting language and it also acts like a high level language, proper high level language. So it does not have main method. Now this comes with some challenges. What if your software is in multiple files like this? Right? So let's say this is your first Python file, this is your second Python file, this is your third Python file. And you have written bunch of code here, here, here. Now you are invoking the first file. You are telling your interpreter invoke python.p1.py. It will start from line number 1 here. It will start from line number 1 and start executing. And if this 2 or 3 if those functions are called or those scripts are called, again it will start executing these, right? Now there could be some block of code that you want to avoid it running. Basically, you are not directly invoking Python 2 or Python 3 file. You have invoked only one Python file, which is 1.py. And in this Python file, you have functions and other code, but at the bottom you have some code to test this code probably. Because this is developed by one more developer, this is developed by another developer, right? Like that. In this file, they might have written some code here at the bottom that they have written to test what functions they have written here. And when this code is running and using this file, you don't want this code to run. So for this, there is a block. There is a block, and that is called the main block. So here you write an if condition saying if that main block is active, then only run this code. It means if you run this script, only this portion will get executed. If you run the script, this portion get executed. Okay, that is where it will start. But if it is not, if you are invoking only this, then it will start from the line 1. Now, the function code will not be invoked unless someone else calls it. A function by itself does not have permission to run at all. Like say you could have created a Python file with writing 5 functions one below the other, and let's say you ran the file. Nothing would work. Not even a single line get executed. Because functions don't have power to run by themselves. They are the slaves. They are the servants. It needs a master. It needs someone else to invoke it. Okay, I'll demo this one. I'll show this one. So please remember, if Python does not have a main function, it has just a main block, and that even main block exists so that when in that script you want to put certain code in a block and say if this script is invoked independently, then only run this line of code. For that you have that main block. Okay, so with this we'll definitely jump into the hands-on workshop. This sets the right context. So with this context, now let's get to the hands-on practice. So if you are directly watching this video, please go to our earlier videos. I have explained how to install VS Code, how to install interpreter, how to run the code, and how to debug. So in all our lessons for hands-on workshops or practice, we will be using VS Code as an IDE. I would highly recommend you to install it on your machine, because I'll be showing a lot of debugging and debugging techniques and how to walk through the code and understand the code. Please do not use these online editors and compilers. Make an effort to install it on your laptop and use it. So let's get started with the functions. I have auto-generated some notes so that it acts like a good reference for us and also for you to revise when you're going for interviews or you're preparing for your exams. So I have some auto-generated notes here for your reference, right? So now let's get started with writing some functions using our IDE, which is VS Code. So I have created a file here called Python. Now let's run this file. Okay, so there is no code at all. I just ran the code. So what happened? Nothing, right? I will also show it running from command prompt or terminal. So I'll say python.exe, and then what is the name of the file? Functions.py. Anything happened? Nothing. But let's say I added one line here saying print hello world. Write this line, save it, and then run it. So you can see that we invoked that IDE. When you press this run button, it is actually invoking a command which you can also manually invoke like this. So you are invoking the Python interpreter and passing that Python file as a input. So what happened here? It printed hello world. How it printed? This print is a function, and if you are using VS Code, please remember this technique. Take your cursor of the mouse, go and just stop it on top of that function and hover it here. So here you will see that this is a function definition. Here it's the name. Then these are the input values. and this is the return type, which is none. Okay. Now let's try to declare our own function, our own first function. How will you do that? Print my messages. This is the name of the function. And you need to write, in case of Python, you have to write this keyword called def. Def stands for definition. Okay. Please remember, you have to write this. This is case sensitive. You cannot write it like this. Capital D. You have to write small d. Def space. And this style of writing function is called snake casing. Okay. Why is it called snake casing? There is something called camel casing. The camel casing is like this: print my messages. So only the first character will be small and the remaining words, the first character will be capital. So this looks like a camel, right? This is small and this is big. The next portions are having uppercase. Okay. So that is why this is called snake casing, where every letter is written in small and you are separating your words by underscores. Okay. Generally, a function is doing certain task, and to describe what it is doing, you will use verbs. Please remember, in your function, the function is written to perform certain task, and that will be represented or explained through a verb. So what is the verb here? The print is the verb, right? So print my messages, and then here you pass the parameter. What is your parameter? You can say just message. Now you can write a function like this, and at the end don't forget to put this colon. And internally, I am not going to write the code to print it myself on the screen. I am going to reuse the function that already exists. Okay, so this is a very, very simple function. Now let's run it and see what happened. Nothing. It just said hello world. So our function is not working. There is some mistake. So how do we solve the mistakes? By debugging. So I'll set a breakpoint here, open the debugger and start. Okay. Now pay attention. Pay attention and see what happens. We are at line number 1 and we are invoking hello world. And I say next line. Okay. It came to line number 3 where there is a function. And then I say next line. And the code exited or the code ended. Pause for a minute and think what happened. I'll debug again with now 2 functions. We went to next line number 3. We went to next line. It did not run line number 4. It went to line number 6. Then again it skipped it. So what is the problem here? The problem here is we have only defined the functions. We have only defined the functions. We have not invoked the functions. So how do you invoke? To invoke, you have to call that function. So how to call? So this is called function invocation. Invocation, or you have to call the function. So how do you call the function? So you say print underscore my messages, and then you say my message hello. So this is where you are invoking that function. Now there is another problem. What is the other problem? Your ID is itself saying that it is not defined, and you may be wondering that maybe I have done a spelling mistake. Let's see. Copy paste the name. So if you double click the name like this with your mouse, the entire name gets selected. Okay, Control C, and then double click here and Control V. So no, there is no spelling mistake, and it is saying it is not defined. And you will be scratching your head that this ID is having some issue. I have declared it here, I have defined it here, but this is saying it is not defined. Why? Now let's run it and see what happens. The error here is, name error here is print my message is not defined. One of the best way to learn programming language is by making mistakes. Even if you have a working code in your first attempt, try to change the code and keep running it again and again and see what errors and mistakes you'll get. It will really help you in the interviews. It will really help you when you start working, because when you see those errors and mistakes, your brain will be able to remember, okay, I had done this mistake and that was the problem. So here there is some issue, and even though I have defined that function, the interpreter is not able to find it. Why? Let's do one thing. Let's debug the code. Let's debug the code and find the answer. So we started. The first line got executed, is getting executed. Hello world is printed. We came to line number 5 and error occurred. What is the error? Name print message is not defined. Right? So what is the problem here? The problem is, in case of Python, it will run the code line by line. It does not know where the function is present in the file. It does not know it. You may be saying that, is it blind? Is the interpreter blind? I can see it. Why can't it interpreter see it? You are able to see it because your file is so small. What if your file has 1 lakh lines of code? Or 10 lakh, 1 million lines of code. It has to search 1 million of lines of code again and again to find your function, which is not scalable, right? So if you write these functions before it is being called, there won't be any issue. Now what I did, I shifted those functions from bottom to the top. Okay, let me move this comment now to the bottom. Now pause for a second and think what happens. Which line will be executed first, which line will be executed second and third and so forth. Let's again set a breakpoint and start. So print got executed. Now where the control will go, interpreter controller will go. It will go to line number 5. Then it will go to line number 8. Then it will go to line number 12. And from here now it will jump back to line number 5. You can see the demo. So in the theory, when I explained, you could see that it was jumping back wherever the function is. You will see that jump. Please observe, it jumped to this line number 6. So when it passes through that function, Python interpreter is remembering that print message has been defined in line number 5. Print message 2 has been defined in line number 8. Why the interpreter have to see that function? Because it will make a note of it. It will make a note of it. And when you call that function, it knows where to jump directly. And if it hadn't seen it before, then it will not know where to jump. I hope you are able to understand it. Now this is completely different than your C and Java languages, where there is a main method and there is a proper sequencing, right? So this is how the Python works. So you have to define those methods and you have to do it this way. Now there is another special block, which is if underscore underscore name is equal to underscore underscore main underscore. Okay, so since you have not yet learned conditional statement, I will explain that in the next video. But for now, just imagine that if condition means it will check this condition, and if this condition is true, then only it will execute the lines below it. For the context, you remember that, because I have to explain this concept of main block in this video and this part, so I have to use this keyword called if. Okay, don't worry, I will explain it in detail in our next video. Now in this main block, I'm going to put a print message and I'll say that I am in main block now. Okay, so now let's run this code and see what happens. Again, let's stop it, set a breakpoint, set one breakpoint here, and then start. So we are here in the first line, definitions, print, and now you can see that this line got executed. So this line got executed because this variable name is equal to main. You may get confused thinking that, oh, here sir wrote main block, so probably line 15 will get executed first. And the answer is no, it doesn't work that way. This block only is an indication to the interpreter whether to run this line of code or not. That's it. Nothing more or nothing less. It has nothing to do with where the execution will start. Execution will start here only from the line 1. Okay. Now I will show you something interesting. So we will comment this line. Okay. And we will comment this line as well. Now what will happen? Let's see. So now nothing got invoked and directly the line 15 got invoked. The nothing got invoked because these are all function definitions. So but interpreter went through them. Okay. Interpreter has gone through them. I'll show that part. Let's stop the interpreter. Let's set some breakpoints here and here. And you will see that interpreter actually went through those functions and made a note saying at line number 5 I have this function, at line number 8 I have this function, and then finally it got into this main block and run it. Okay. The purpose of this main block is if there is some script that you only want to run when this file is invoked. So this variable, let me show in the watch again. This variable here, you can add it in the watch. I'll copy the variable name, put it in a watch. What is this value set to? It is set to __ main and __. So this will be set to main only when you are invoking this script functions.py. Let's say there is another Python script functions2.py. So when you are running that code, in that this main name will not be set to main. I will demonstrate that when I introduce you to concept called modules and writing code in multiple Python files for your projects. So this, when I explain you the projects and when I explain you how to write code in multiple files, I'll explain this part. At that time you will see this variable will not be set to main if it is the other file that is being invoked. Okay. So now let's do one thing. I'll also write the syntax here. The syntax is you write definition and then you write name of the function, and then you write parameters, and then there is something called return type, and then colon. Now this return type here is optional. So now I will demonstrate to you how to do that return type. Okay. Let's call this function as get my message. Okay. So whatever is the message that is passed, we are returning back a string. Okay. So now inside this, let's do one thing where we say new string is equal to message plus how are you. Okay. And then at the end I will say return new string. So what are we demonstrating now? We are demonstrating return type and how to return the message and how to take that message. Okay. And what I'm doing now is, instead of directly writing code here in the beginning, I am just writing now all under this main block. Okay. So the first demonstration was print my message, print _ my message, and we were passing hello world to it. Okay, that was our first example. Now we are doing a second one, which is get my message. So here I'll declare a variable called message. Let me do one thing. Let me just say get my message, and here I will pass a name Mahesh. Okay. So what I'm doing here, we declared a function, and what is the syntax of the function? Syntax is definition name of the function, parameters, and return type. Correct? So as per this, I declared one function here, which is, it has a definition as a keyword, it has a name as a function name, it has a parameter. Now parameters are optional. You can have 1, 2, 3, multiple. I'll explain multiple parameters demonstration little later. So now here we are passing a single parameter called message, and the return type here, the data type is string, which is str. Okay. Whatever the message that I'm getting, to that message I'm appending additional string called how are you, and I'm returning that new string. Okay. Now let's go ahead and run this program and pause for a while and tell me what will be the output. You will print this line, perfectly fine. Print message, hello world, you'll print this, perfectly fine. And you will say get my message, and you'll pass the message, and you will print Mahesh, how are you, right? So let's see what happens. I'll just run it and see first. Only first two lines are printed, and this third line, Mahesh, how are you, is not printed. And let's understand the reason why. So I'll set a breakpoint here and debug this. So interpreter is now scanning all the functions. It scanned this function, it scanned this function. Now it entered the main block. So what happened? I am in main block now. So that got printed. Now in debugger, there is an option to go inside a function or skip the function. Please pay attention. Here in this grid, you see one arrow, which is the downward arrow, and shortcut is function key 11, F11, which means step into. Okay. On the left side of it, you see something called step over, where there is a dot and a arrow which is jumping over the dot. That is called F10. Okay. So if you do step into, then only will go inside this message. Otherwise, it will not go inside the message. It will execute entire message and come out. It will not wait for you. Okay. So I'll demonstrate the step into now. So we got into the message and we print this message. So then we go to the next line. So now I am calling get my message. Okay. Now this is where I want you to learn something which is call stack. You can also see that the get message is there in the stack. I think call stack we should learn little later when we have a lot of things. So before that, let's understand these variables, not breakpoints. I need to see the watch. Okay. Now what is this message variable that is passed? It's a variable, and by default strings are immutable in Python, right? Now there is another variable called new string. Now this new string is not yet defined because the interpreter has not yet come to that line. So this message variable, which is passed as a function parameter, it has a value Mahesh. Now when I go to the next line, what happened? This string Mahesh got appended with how are you, and a new string is formed, and that string is Mahesh, how are you. You can see that we are doing return of that value. So please observe the syntax. We are saying return new string. So what does this return new string do? It will package this value and throw it to the caller, the line from where the call was invoked. So when we throw it and when we come here, there is nobody to catch it. Since there is nobody to catch it, there is a catch drop, and there is a catch drop and you don't have the data. So how to catch it? To catch it, you will say new message is equal to this. And then of course you want to see what is that you caught, right? So what is that you caught is you print it and see it. So now let's run it. So you can see Mahesh, how are you is printed. I'll just set one breakpoint here, remove everything else, and directly show you that what I receive. So I'll just say debug. Now all that code ran, and directly now we are at line number 26. So here now in the watch, by the way, you can see that those variables that I used inside this function are no more accessible. Can you see that? So when I say new string, it says I don't know what is the new string. Even though this new string is returned here, but it does not have it. Why? Stack memory. So when you came inside this was allocated in stack memory, And when you return date, whatever is declared inside this function is erased from the stack memory. The values were thrown at calling function, and that calling function has to capture and allocate a fresh memory to store it. So it declared a new variable called new message, and that new message is valid. New message is valid and it has that particular value. Okay, and you are able to print that value. So how to return the value? You have to return the value like this. You have to say return and that parameter. And in lot of programming languages, you can only return one variable. It can be a primitive data type like int, char, float, mean string, float, or it can be an object, but only one and only one. But in case of Python, you can return multiple. Internally, it combines that and create a tuple, and it feels like, it is returning multiple. Okay, but it feels very convenient. It feels very convenient to say return a comma b in Python. I'll demonstrate that in some time. Now let's see how to pass two or more messages, right? For that, I'm going to define another function called definition join messages. Okay, joint messages, not join, or you can say combine the messages. I'll say append messages, and I'll say message 1 comma message 2 comma message 3. And then now earlier I did return, right? Now I will show you without return. So earlier I had written return a return type. Now I will show you without writing any return type but still returning it. Okay, then I'll say final message is equal to message 1. Final message is equal to message 1 plus message 2 plus message 3. And then I'll say return final message. So what we are doing here, we are getting more than one parameter and we are combining all of them and we are returning. And I have not written return type here just to demonstrate to you that it can work without that as well. But as a good programmer, for the sake of other programmers, for helping other programmers understand what code you are writing, for the sake of documentation, it is always better to write the return type. And in the interviews, definitely don't forget to write it. The more your code looks nice, neat, tidy, readable, with right spaces, right comments, right variable names, right function names, the more interviewer likes it and they understand it faster. So do not practice even when you are practicing coding with variables names like IJKLM, because what happens with IJKLM is you get used to that kind of naming convention, and when you are under a stress in the interview, naturally will end up writing code that way. So from day one, as you are learning programming, start these good practices. It may take you little extra time, but you will get used to it. It will become your second nature to write code this way. So even in your exams, lab exams, your engineering exams, interviews, and eventually when you join company, you practice writing this kind of a code and it will really help you and sets you apart. So final message is this, and I am returning final message. Now let me show you this. So I am invoking combined message is equal to append messages. Now see here, append is a verb and message is a noun and messages is plural. So even that singular versus plural, all of these, the more you make it, sound correct, the more your code is readable and understandable to others. So append messages, you by define, you know that it will append the messages, right? So I will say India, comma, is, comma, Great. Okay. So I am invoking this message, but now I am hard coding these values. I could have very well done it like this, right? I could have said message 1 is equal to this, message 2 is equal to this, and I would have passed those values as well. Let me do like that because I see that in all of the functions I have hard coded the value. So let me declare variables and do it. Okay. So the first variable I'm declaring is message 1 with a space here, message 2 is message 3. Great. Okay. Now I will, instead of hard coding these values, I'm going to use those parameters. So I'll say message 1 comma message 2 comma message 3. So these variables I have declared here, I am passing those variables, and whatever is the answer that came in combined message, and now I'm going to print that message. So I hope you understood here. I was just hard coding the values earlier. Now I have declared those variables. I'm passing those variables and I'm printing this message. Now to see the demonstration, directly debug this code from here, because the rest of the code you already know what we did. Now let's go here, and I want to show you something which is append messages has this variable called final message. So if I put final message here, it will say that I don't know, because it's not yet created, and it will create in that function. And message 1 definitely is there in the memory as India. So to step into the function, I use F11. Now you can see it. So you can see this message 1, message 2 and message 3. Now some of you may be getting confused that we have to use the same variable name of whatever we pass here, and that is not true. That's not correct. This could have been very much like M1, M2, M3, or my message 1, my message 2, my message 3. The names here you give can be anything. It does not have no relationship whatsoever with what you pass. Okay, it is just a coincidence that I use the same name. I can change the names very much. Okay, now what is the final message? So final message concatenate all of this. You can see India is great, and it will return back that message, and we are going to print that. So you have it printed. So this covers multiple concepts. You saw the demonstration that you can pass variables like this as many as you like. You can collect it. The another important thing you learned is I am not putting a return type here, and if I put return type, nothing would change. It just is a better style, better documentation to help the developer understand that you are going to return a string. Okay, so now let's quickly refer our notes and see what is the next concept. Okay, so there is another syntax. The another syntax is to make developer understand, you can also write the data type. Okay, so let me change the function and show it to you. Here I can very much write it like this. So this helps your fellow developers in the team to understand what is the data type of this. Okay, now how does it help, you can ask, right? The way it helps is, generally when developers are working with each other, what they do is the other developer in the team would have written the function. Okay, and I want to consume that function. So what I do, I go and hover over like this. I take my mouse and hover over like this. Now can you clearly see that there are 3 input parameters called message 1, message 2, message 3, all of them accept string as an input. And what is the return type? Again a string. So for other developers in your team, if you explicitly declare data type, it helps them to understand. Otherwise what they have to do? They have to open your code and see what it is. They have to see, okay, what data type I should pass here. It is very confusing. So it is a very good practice to pass these data types and also return type. And in the interview and all, if you write code like this, your interviewer will really appreciate it. Okay. So that was the other syntax that you can use. And here is a small example of square root function where the data type is int and it is returning int. Okay. So now this is what is interesting, which is returning multiple values, and this is the magic of Python. Okay. So the function name is get user info, and you can return two values like this. Like I said earlier, internally it creates a tuple. Tuple is a data structure that you will learn in our lessons where I cover data structure. Okay. So for now, you just imagine that there is something called tuple that sir will explain in future videos. But I would like to demonstrate this, and it's very, very interesting. And this really, there is a very famous interview question that lot of, you can say that some companies ask this question. Definitely Microsoft and Google, Amazon, they don't ask it. There are other companies which ask it. It is called, can you swap two numbers? Can you write code to swap two numbers? So one of the very famous, widely asked question. What I'll do is I will demonstrate this concept along with that interview question. So let's go for it. So the function that you're writing is what? It is called swap two numbers. Definition, swap two numbers. Okay. So your number 1 is an integer and your number 2 is another integer. Okay. And what are you returning? You are returning a tuple. Okay. Since I have not covered the tuple set, what I'll do, since it is optional also, right? I will not write it. I'll just leave it blank. So in C language, to do the swapping of the number, generally what is done is they use temp is equal to number 1. And then they will say number 1 is equal to number 2. And then they will say number 1 is equal to temp. This is one of the very commonly used algorithm in other languages like say C or C++ or Java, where you have to declare a temporary variable. It is as good as, I have two things, I want to swap. So of course here either one way is I throw it in the air and do it, but that I cannot do. So what I do, I take these two. First I store it temporarily somewhere, I swap it to my other hand and then pick up this, right? So this is as good as this. You have a temporary variable where you store one value, you copy the num2 value to number 1, and finally the temporary value you put it back to number 1. Now in Python you don't have to do this circus. I'll just comment it. In Python you can directly say return number 2 comma number 1, and this would work. Okay, so let's invoke this and I'll show the demonstration. Let's declare two variables. Number 1 is equal to 10, number 2 is equal to 20, and swap two numbers. You're passing number 1, number 2, and you are collecting back and you will say number 2. Okay, so people who are not familiar with print statement yet, we will have a detailed probably video on explaining different features of print. Time being, you remember that you can print variable values by putting them in this parenthesis, curly braces like this, provided you write this character F here. If you write F here, you can print the values of the variables like this in Python. Okay, this is all part of the print function documentation that you can read online or read it in Python documentation. It will show you all the varieties in which you can use print. Okay, pretty much it is like take the code, copy paste it, run it and see what it is. That is how you can learn. So I don't want to spend a lot of time explaining you how to use print. That you can learn by yourself. Okay, now the demonstration here is how to swap two numbers in Python. Okay, so I'll set the breakpoint here to number 1. Let's start debugging. So let's clean our watches. Okay, let's add number 1 and number 2. And I want to make one change just to remove your confusion, which is, let me stop debugging, go to this function and rename this variable to something else. Okay, let's do value 1 and value 2. Okay, value 2, and I'm returning value 2 first and value 1. Because you may be thinking that sir could be lying because he's using same name again and again, so it is still getting swapped there, right? Okay, so let's start again. Two variables, please see in the watch, number 1, number 2, and also add value 1 and value 2 in the watch. What is happening now? None of the variables have got even any birth reserved or memory reserved in the RAM. So number 1 got memory allocated in the stack, number 2 got allocated 10 and 20. And now step into the function. Once you step into the function, now value 1 and value 2 got allocated. How they got allocated? Because they're part of the parameters, so they got allocated, they have the memory in the stack. Now I'm returning value 2 and value 1. I just changed the order, and this is where the magic happens. Please keep an eye on the watch. What happened? The number 1 and number 2, the values haven't changed yet. They haven't changed yet, but the value 1 and value 2 got freed from the memory because they were allocated in stack in that function. Since you're out of the function, they got freed. Now look at the magic. What happened? So the values got swapped. So in Python, swapping two numbers is a single line of code, and in C language, it is 3 lines of code. So I will show you multiple such examples where you will see that what takes so many lines to do in C and Java, in Python you can do it in 1 or 2 lines. That is how this language has become a favorite, or you can say darling of a lot of programmers, where by writing small piece of code you can do a lot of work. And this also clarified how to return two values. Now internally, it looks like a gimmick because internally it creates in another object called tuple and it throws back that object and then that get assigned. Okay, now let's see our notes and what are the next parts that we need to demonstrate. Return type examples. Yeah, I think I was returning only integer string, but we can also return an int. So that I think is very clear from this example that we tried just now, where we returned an int, right? We in fact not one int, we returned two ints. We returned a tuple, right? So swap two numbers, we did not return a string, we have returned the other values. So let's see. The next one is infinite loop and stack overflow. I like this explode function name, so I'm going to copy this code and show you how explode happens here. What is an infinite loop, you may be asked, right? Or you may encounter an infinite loop if you don't do the good job. So this is the definition of the function. What I'm doing here, inside a function I am again invoking the same function. Okay, and to help you understand, what I'll do is I'll do one more change in this, which is I'll pass a variable called count. Okay, and every time I will increase that variable count. Okay, so here I'll say f and I'll print the count. I am modifying that code a bit to make it a little bit more fun and interesting for you. Count plus 1. So please observe, what did I do here? I took a additional the parameter to that function explode called count, and the data type is int, and in the print I am printing that count value along with that string. Okay, and then before I call it again, I am just incrementing that value by 1. Okay, now I am going to invoke explode function from here. Let's remove this breakpoint. all the breakpoints are removed, and I'm going to invoke explode now. Let's see whether it will explode. And we'll start with 1, value 1. So get ready to see the magic. Run Python. What happened? Okay. Maximum recursion depth exceeded. I hope you are able to read this message. Let me increase the font size. So how many times it ran? By the way, it ran so fast that blink of eye, we don't know. So the below this is out of that terminal memory. Okay. So it did not start at 10. It started at 1 because terminal has a fixed memory. So the old parts are deleted. So we are only seeing from 10. So what happened here? It ran how many times? It ran 99939 times, and finally Python interpreter said maximum recursion depth exceeded. In case of C and C++ or Java, you will have Stack Overflow. So it will crash. The code will crash. If you write infinite loop, your program will crash because it will run out of stack memory. In Python, they have put some limit. Maximum you can call is these many number of times. Okay. So this is a good example of recursion. Okay. Now I want to show you this in call stack, because in the theory part I explained to you how the stack memory and how call stack looks, right? No better way than seeing it in a recursive call or an infinite loop. So we went to explode. Now here in this left side you will have something called call stack. Okay. So variables, watches, and call stack. Now please observe how this call stack will grow as I debug this code. And also, yeah, so we print 1 stack level dip, 2 stack level dip. Can you see? Can you see how this is increasing? Can you see this? So you can see in the call stack here. So what is happening? It is again and again invoking that same method, right? And you can, and another part, this is a very beautiful demonstration actually. So that whole concept of the stack memory and how those values are preserved, I'll show you the live demonstration. Right now the value is how much? 13. If you go to the previous call, that count value, are you able to see it here in this yellow marker here? It is 12. If you go down, it is 11. So it clearly shows that in the stack memory, whatever those variables are there, you have it this way. Correct? And when I explain recursion, probably we'll have a dedicated, dedicated lesson on recursive functions. And that time I can show you more details, because recursive functions are very little difficult to get your head around them, and it cannot be covered as a part of functions class. A recursive function needs its own class, probably for an hour. So I will cover that later, but you will have interesting demonstrations there. So you can see that value is, it's been 1, 2, 3, and you can go to stack memory and you can see what the value is there. Okay. So let's stop this one here. And yeah, I wanted to cover another part of recursion, but that would get into a whole different level of discussions. Let's pause that one and cover it a little later. So let's get back to our notes and see. Okay, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So this is basically one function invoking the other function, that another function invoking this one, that invoking the third one. I think this you got a clarity. I will let you do this as a homework. You can write this code or copy this code and run and debug it yourself. Okay. Now comes an interesting part, which is called function overloading in Python. This is simulated. See, Python doesn't support traditional overloading, but it can be simulated. So how is it simulated? So one way it is simulated is by having a default value for parameters. So if you have default value, then it feels like, okay, if I don't pass it also, it's okay, and it will set a default value. Okay, that is one. What is the other way? There is a concept of variable arguments, where you write with star arguments. And when you do with variable arguments, you can read those multiple values. These are very important concepts and it get used in the industry a lot. So please pay attention. The first function is where there is a parameter called name, and this name parameter is of type string. Okay. And if you don't pass anything, the default value is guessed. And we are not returning anything. Okay. So let's go ahead and write this function, because only when you write it, debug it, and see it is where it get registered in your memory and you learn it really well. So I am defining a function here. Now if I keep calling explode, nothing would work. So what I will do is I will comment this line. Okay, otherwise our code will keep exploding and we'll not be able to see any other demo. Okay, I commented that line. So we are writing definition and we are saying greet guest as a name of the function, and we are taking name as a parameter, and that is string. Okay, however, we are setting a default value. The default value is what? Is guessed. And what does this function return? It returns none. Okay, so let's check the syntax. Do you declare the variable name? You tell the data type, you write a equal to symbol, and you write a default value. This is the syntax. And then you say return type is none. So what happens? It creates a illusion of overloading of the method. Overloading means, this is in technical term, to explain this concept, there is another word that is used, is called polymorphism. It's an English word. What is polymorphism? A same thing behaving in a different way based on the input. It's the same thing that behaves in different way. So what are the examples of polymorphism in real life? Let's say a teaspoon. You can use teaspoon for for eating, but you can also use teaspoon to tighten the screws. You'll use it like a screwdriver. So it is something like that. It's the same function. It behaves in different way based on what is your input. So when you write like this, now I'm going to print and say hello and plus name. Okay, so let's invoke this function from here, greet guest, and you will say Sangeeta, and then I'll say greet guest and none. So what I'm doing, I'm invoking the function. I'm invoking the function one time with some value and another time without any value. So let's run it and see, and then debug it. So what happened? The output is hello Sangeeta for this line, and for the second invocation the output is hello guest. The first and the very foremost thing is that it allowed you to do it like this, that you could pass it, call it without the parameter. Now to understand and value this, you have to see what happens if I had not made the default value there. Okay, so to understand this, I'll change this code a bit now. Okay, I will keep a backup of this code here. Okay, I'll just comment that code and I will remove this, what I have done here. I'll remove this. Okay, now tell me what will happen. What I removed this part, right? And I just declared without that. Now what will happen? Will it work? Will it not work? Will we get compile time? I mean, will we get interpreter error or we will get logical error? So what type of error we'll get? So we'll get an error by the interpreter and I'll show it to you. So what is that interpreter is saying? Interpreter is scolding me. It is saying get greet guests at line number 63. Greet guest is missing one required positional argument name. So interpreter is saying there is a problem in your code you wrote in line number 63. You are not sending me one argument that you should send. So interpreter is not happy with me. So it is saying at line number 63 you have done a mistake. Let's say I don't want to print anything. At least in that case I should send like this empty string. I should pass like this. Then it will be happy with me. It is just that it will not print that anything here. That line will be blank. Okay. So this is a technique very widely used in the industry. I will revert it back. What I'll do is I'll comment this portion, and when you try on your machine, you make sure you change the code that way and try it out. And I'll add the correct code here. Okay. So here I'll say this would have a problem. Okay. Like I keep telling you that the best way to learn programming is you keep changing and have that inquisitive or a curious mind. What happens if I remove it? What happens I change it? What happens if I do that? Right? I told you, like, put here colon at the end. What happens if you remove that? Right? And then you just run and see. So now it will say syntax error expected colon in line number 34. So like this you should change the code and run it differently and see what happens. So you learned this concept. Okay. Now let's go back to our notes. This is again an interesting concept, which is variable arguments. Okay. So observe very carefully here. There is a star symbol before this variable numbers. There is a star symbol and the data type is integer. Okay. So when you put the star symbol, what happens is it internally creates a list of that data type, and you can pass either 2 values or 3 values or 4 values and it would work. This is very beautifully done example. So let's go ahead and implement this. And I'll write that code line by line so that you can also write along with me. Okay. So start writing this code. Definition, get sum, then star, numbers, data type is integer, and what is that it will return? It will also return an integer. Okay. Sorry, the colon would go here at the end. And then now you have these integers. So declare a variable sum of all numbers is equal to, there is a sum function in Python. So sum function, there is a built-in sum function. You don't have to write that. You can just directly use that. I haven't taught you the for loops, looping and all. So that's why I'm using a built-in function. Otherwise we could have written this by ourselves also. And then finally I will return sum of all numbers. Okay. The real fun is not in defining it. The real fun is in invoking it. Okay. I'll show that one. Answer 1 is equal to get sum, and here you will say 1, 2, 3, and then you will say print answer 1 is equal to answer 1. Then we'll say answer 2 is equal to get sum, and here you will pass 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then print answer 2 is equal to answer 2. See, the compiler was, interpreter was very unhappy when I did not pass the right number of variables. I'll show one more demonstration. Let's say this append messages, right? 1, 2, 3. Now append messages, where are we invoking it from? We are invoking it from here, right? Now to create irritation to the interpreter, I will do one more thing. I'll just, to demo to you, I'll just delete one parameter here. Okay. What I did to show you the power of that append messages, I deleted this. Okay. I'll set one breakpoint and run and show it to you that interpreter won't be happy with this. It will say, how dare you, that you pass only 2 when there is a third argument. It is very strict. If there are 2 and if there are particular data type, it wants you to pass in that data type only, and those many number. You cannot even change the sequence. If there is an int string, you have to pass int string. If there is a string int, you have to follow exact order, exact data type, and exact numbers when you do function invocation. One missing required argument, right? But however, I'll delete this, otherwise our code won't run. But however, here I passed only 3 and here I passed 5, and code would just work normally. And let's see the demo. So I'll remove this breakpoint. Okay. I'll remove this also. Okay. Now this is where the magic happens. You say get sum. You are invoking this function with 3 arguments. We go in. Now you can see that all 3 arguments are there. Okay. Let's add them to the watch and see what is there. Clear your watch. Add numbers. You can see that it's there. All these values are present. And we are invoking a sum function, which is a built-in function which calculated the sum of those numbers, and you return back the value. And you printed that value, sum of 3 numbers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 is 6. Answer is 6. Now I am invoking with more variables and it would still work because it created this another data structure now. And here you had said int, but it combined those and it created this data structure with all those values, and we are able to compute the sum. So this is how you can implement the variable arguments. Okay. Now let's say you are implementing a shopping cart. Shopping cart for what? Swiggy, Zomato, Amazon, Zepto. You have the values of your items. You don't know whether customer will buy 1 product or 2 products or 3 products or 10 products. Correct? You don't know how many products are going to be there in the cart. You can use this kind of function where it accepts variable arguments and you are able to calculate. I'm just trying to help you to relate it with the real life example where the variable arguments can be useful. At the runtime, you will know whether you will have 2 numbers to add or 5 numbers to add or 7 numbers to add. So this is called variable arguments. Okay. Now coming to naming convention, which is super important. Like I said, function and variables in Python, please use snake cases, and I use snake cases in all of the code that we wrote. And constants is uppercase. Say we are writing a function to see whether somebody is eligible to get a driving license. And in India, you need to be more than 18 years, or say somebody is eligible for voting. So 18 years. Now 18 is a constant value. So I can say age limit for voting is equal to 18 and it can be a constant. So constants are generally indicated with uppercase. Now interpreter does not care about it. Whether you write small letter or capital, all uppercase, it really does not care. It is purely for documentation purpose so that the developers can talk to each other and understand each other code better. It is purely and purely for that purpose. And if you follow all these conventions when you write the code in the interviewer, when in the interview, the interviewer will suddenly think, oh my God, this person is a student, but is able to practice all the good practices that are used in the industry. So their respect for you will go up by a notch. Now let's see the next one, which is best practices for writing the function. Don't repeat yourself. What does it mean? You wrote the code and there are a bunch of lines of code that are repeating again and again. It is a clear indication that you take that and make that as a separate function. Use meaningful names. Generally go with that verbs, and if there is a noun required, you add that verb and the noun, and try to put verb at the beginning. Like say get sum, find average, is eligible for voting, right? So whatever you're doing, you try to use that in the naming. Next one is keep function small. One function, one responsibility is one of the beautiful and most important thing that even a experienced developer sometimes they forget. Okay, what they do is they will write just like this: definition function. Okay, function, and do this, and then they'll keep writing like long function like this, which will be like hundreds and lines of code. And when you look at that code, you just start thinking, okay, what the hell this function is doing? They write one function, but everything is inside that function. So this is really a bad practice. You should not be doing this. One function, one responsibility. If you are doing average, you do average and sum. If you are trying to print, you print it. If you are trying to send, you try to send it. One function, one responsibility. The more functions does not cause any load to any CPU or compiler or anybody. And it also helps you to isolate issues, debug issues, and make your code more readable and understandable. Even in the interview also, if you are asked to write a code, see if that can be broken into 2-3 functions. Okay. Next one. Use return instead of print and results. Yes. By showing that you know how to return the values and get work done shows that you are a evolved developer. The beginner is the one who always print what they want to show. If you are more evolved developer, you will always ask the function to do that work, return back the value, and in the invoker, in the place where you invoke it, you will print it. So please make sure you are returning the values and not printing in the function. Then write testable functions and avoid hard-coded values. I think these are good principles. If you demonstrate this in your interview or in your company when you join, automatically you will learn the respect of your fellow developers and your managers. Okay. So the last one is docstring. What is docstring? Docstring is a documenting that function. So I'll show the demonstration. I will add this code here and we will see how it works. It's one of the, you did need to know this. You may not practice. Don't try to do this when you're practicing interview questions. You lose a lot of time, but I'll show the power of this. So now we wrote a function called add. Of course, I don't like these variables name A and B. It should have been better. And you, in the codes here, in these 3 codes, you wrote the description of that and you say what are the parameters and what it returns. Now, what is the advantage? The advantage is when I'm invoking that function, I can see that. Can you see it? The moment I open the brace, whatever documentation I wrote there is visible here in the IDE. Right? So this is the advantage. This add function, whatever I write here, when you are invoking that function, if you are working with Mang Fang companies where each product code runs into millions of lines. It runs into millions of lines of code and it will have more than 1 million functions. And that code is under development from last 10 years. And maybe some 20,000-30,000 developers have worked on that code base. So it is technically impossible to do documentation or remember anything. So that is why this documentation is added, because the moment you call that function, it will tell you that it adds 2 numbers and it returns sum of that. So that is what the documentation is all about. Okay. See, this technique you can use for your projects and all. In your projects, you can write this way. And you check in this code, your projects in GitHub, right? When you do that, and if somebody goes to your GitHub and sees your code, right, they will see, oh my God, this student is following industry practices. They are writing documentation for their code. So they'll really appreciate it. So make sure in the code that you put in your GitHub, you have all this. Now, finally, passing parameters to Python file via command prompt. We learned how to pass parameters to functions, but now let's learn how to pass parameters to Python script itself, because the projects that you will do requires this. In real world, when you take Python and use it and integrate in your projects and workflow, you need this. So that is why I'm covering this part, the passing parameters to scripts. One of the important thing is when you invoke the scripts, you always pass some parameters to it. Very interestingly, I remember this in one of the interview, and not for full-time position, for a contract position at Microsoft. I asked the candidate saying, person wrote the code and I asked, how do you run it generally? So the person said, I'll open VS Code and run it. And I was shocked, and person had probably 2 years experience. I said, is there a way to run the code without using Visual Studio or any of the IDE? And the person was not aware. It means, and the contract position that we were hiring for was writing some jobs to run them in backend for our quality related work. So a person who has not written any script or code with that runs in backend by automatically by itself, this knowledge was very critical. This experience was very critical. And I was shocked to know that that person from the day of college till 2 years in industry had never ran any code without opening Visual Studio. So I don't want you to be that example, and please learn this with more care. So let's create a Python script called greetuser.py. So here under functions only I'll do it. Let's call it greetuser.py. Now in this function, let's say I want to greet that user. Okay. So for that I'll say print greet user, and I'll take that user name as an input. And what I would do here, I would print that hello and print that person's name. So to print the variable, you anyway need a f here. And what is that? You need to add definition at the beginning. Okay. Now, what is one of the way to run it? One of the way to run it is you just call that print greet user here. But let's say I don't want to do that. I want to invoke this greet user function and do it. Let's say like this. How? You invoke the Python interpreter and then you say greet user, and here you want to pass the name. This is called invoking that Python script without using any IDE through the interpreter and pass some values to it. What happened? Nothing. Nothing happened because this value name is not passed to this function. So how do you do that? So again, I'll write that if block underscore name, if this is equals to underscore main, and inside this you check if by default if this script gets any input, then it will have something called variable arguments, and you can refer the syntax here in the notes. It will be something like sys.argv. Okay, so you first check whether it exists and then you do it this way. So how to do it? You check this length. Now why is that sys is saying undefined? Because it's not available by default. So for this you have to import the code that is there in the other. It is written by and it's available in the standard library. So in C programming you do something like include in stdio.h, right? So like that in Python you have to use something called import. I will have a detailed video on this one. In that I will demonstrate how to do projects with multiple file, how to import the code from open source, how to import the code from other files. I will have a complete dedicated video on projects, creating projects, modules, packages, environments, and using open source. So that we'll do it probably after 2 or 3 lessons. In that I will explain this import at very greater depth. For now, just remember that you have to write it like this to access those values. So you write import.sys, and now you can see sys.argv. If it is greater than 1, then you invoke this function. And where is that value available? It is available in an list. It is available in a list and it is at the first position. Now you may ask, we learnt that lists and arrays always start at 0. Why is that you are using it from the first position? Answer to this is very interesting, and you will see it when I debug it. And if it is not there, then what you can say? Then you can say print, please pass the name to the script. Okay. So I will run it from Visual Studio, then I'll also run it without Visual Studio and show it to you. Very simple, very simple. Basically, you are importing the sys and then, okay. So now let's run it and see what happened. It says, please pass the name to the script. We are not passing the name to the script. So this line got executed. I will debug it and show now. Let's set a breakpoint. Debug. Now go to watch. And here you can now add this to the watch, which is sys.argv. So when you add sys.argv, it is saying that there is a list, and in that list, what is the first variable? The first variable is C Python engineering functions greet user.py. So the first variable is the name of the script. And if you say like this, which is sysargv1, you will get an error. What is the error? List index out of range. So don't get confused. What is this error and why we get it? I will teach when I teach data structures. For now, you know that it is an error. Okay. And what is the length of it? So what is the length here? So when you do like this, you have to learn it line by line. So length, when you hover on this, you will see that it is a function. What type of function it is? It is a built-in function. And it's a built-in function to find how many elements are there. So you can, how to check it? You can also check it in the watch like this. You can invoke a function like this, built-in function like this in the watch, and it will tell you what is the return value. And this value, if it is greater than 1, then only it will greet the user. Otherwise, it will say, please pass the name to the script. And at the location 1, what value we have? At the location 1, we have, so say sys.argv at 0. At 0, we have the name of that file. Okay. So that is the reason when I say this if condition will fail and you go to else. Some of you may be really confused that sir has not yet thought if else and why is demoing this. Don't worry, I will cover it again when I explain conditional statement. But here we are checking whether how many variables are there. Now question is, how do you invoke this file and print that greeting, right? I will show that magic here in the terminal. So you say python.exe and then you say greet the user, and here you say Mahesh. Now you can see that output, hello Mahesh. Okay. So what happened here? It invoked that Python file and passed that parameter, and then this line got executed. This function got executed. Now I will show something even more interesting. Let's say same thing. I'll say Mahesh, then Sangeeta, Amit. Only Mahesh is printed. Why? Because we are only passing that first value here, and only we are printing that. So to print second, again, to read second value, I'll have to do this. I'll do one thing. Instead of greater than 1, I'll say greater than 2. Okay. And then we can do like this. Then both values would be printed. So I'll say Mahesh and Sangeeta, and it would be printed. But if I say Mahesh and Sangeeta and Amit, it will print Mahesh and Sangeeta only. Okay. But if I only did like this, only one, then it will say pass the name to the script, or we'll say pass at least 2 names, pass 2 names to the script. You understood? Basically, the values that you pass here separated by space, each value is treated as one input, and it is a string input. The data type is string. Okay. Now let's say you want to do sum of 2 numbers. Okay. So then what you should do? You should convert that string to integer and then add. Okay. The same code, if you want to do sum, you have to do it that way. The other way to write this code is you can write a for loop and then iterate through these elements and add all of them. So that is the other way as well. So I'll give you a homework where implement sum.py script in which you can pass multiple values and add them. See, for that you have to learn for loop, and probably you can do it when you learn for loop. Okay, but you can implement for two numbers. If you pass any two number, it should take those values and print it. Okay, so let's go back to our notes. So I have already covered the main function, the main block. Okay, so this is being already covered, and here there is a very nice definition of it. Okay, so what is it? So main name is a special built-in variable in Python. It holds name of the module. If Python scripting is being run directly, the name is set to main. If it is being imported into another script, the name will be the module's name. So when you import it into other, it will have a module name. Then it won't be equal and it won't run that line. Okay, so that is how it is done. Now in summary, what are the things? So functions help in modular code and reuse. Use parameters and return values effectively. Understand the call stack and recursion. Follow the naming conventions and best practices. Pass the parameter via command line for flexible scripting, and then use name block to protect the script entry points. Okay. So with this, let's wind up functions. I hope you liked it. If you're watching this video on our mobile apps, please go ahead and comment. Add your review comments on our Play Store reviews or Apple Store reviews. If you're watching it on YouTube, please share your feedback and observations in the YouTube comments. And if you're watching it on our LMS, you can comment there as well. Thank you for listening. Wish you all the best. Namaste.